Well, I was thinking about how to start this message, and one question kept coming to my mind. Is your family weird? You see, that's a question that we get asked of my family a lot. That's why I'm asking it to you, because from time to time people look at us and say, are you guys just weird? I said, if you're asking that, then you don't want the answer. But no, it makes people asking us this question. It may spring from this. And those of you that have ever driven in a car with us when we're together as a family, something happens in the midst of our drive. We're just driving along, and then all of a sudden somebody will shout out, be it Rachel or Rebecca or Debbie or myself. They'll say, "Element, green one!" And then it could be when nothing's going on and it's quiet. It could be in the middle of a conversation. In fact, just yesterday, Becky and I, we were driving up, and we were in Audubon, Pennsylvania. You know, there's Audubon, Pennsylvania. It's nothing like Audubon. Pretty neat wildlife refuges and everything. And we're driving up this winding road, and we're going past the wildlife refuge. And I had been up there the day before, and I saw the new visitor center. So I'm talking to her about the visitor center, and I'm pointing it out to her as we're driving. I said, "Look, Beck, here's the visitor center over here. They're just about done construction. Element red one, and yeah, maybe we'll visit it once it's done." And if you're in our car, you say, "Well, it's just going to the Tourette's or something." No. It's something we do. Where it comes from, let me give you an explanation of what happens in our car sometimes. Several years ago, we were looking for a new car, and I said, "Man, I want to get a Honda," because I've always kind of had Hondas and liked how Hondas were. So we were talking as a family about what model to get, and I said, "You know what I always wanted? I wanted a Honda Element." You know Honda Element? I always said, "Man, they're pretty cool." So I said, "That's what we should get." And then Debbie chimes in. She goes, "No! That's the ugliest thing I've ever seen. It looks like a big shoe or something." And I said, "Yeah, but a cool big shoe." And then she would tell me, she goes, "No one would buy something that ugly. I mean, you never even see them on the roads." So it was a way to kind of prove it to her that, yeah, they are on the road. Yeah, they do look cool. We'd be driving along, and when I'd see one, I'd point it out. "Look, there's an Element. You said there's another one? There's another one." And what that got into now, it kind of morphed into a game that our whole family plays, even today, years later. We still, every time we see an Element, the first person that sees it, they yell out Element and what color it is. And they get a point if they're the first to do it. And then they get another point if it's in their favorite color. So if I saw an orange one, I'd get 2 points. So it's kind of gotten into this game. And no matter what we're doing and driving around, this is always in play. So we're kind of always looking for that too, no matter what we're doing. And I guess a good way to describe this kind of focus is that this is our mission. For lack of a better word. It's always going on and woven into whatever we may be doing. You see, a good mission is something that we're continually committed to, rather than one that's kind of easily accomplished or quickly accomplished, and we kind of go on to the next thing. A good mission is something that's a part of who we are. You see, our family, we're not weird. We're on a mission. Okay? And it's this idea of mission I wanted to kind of talk about this morning, because it's our focus today as we return to our challenge series. Once a month we do our challenge series. And our challenge for 2019 is becoming, where we're learning to follow Jesus in becoming his disciple. Now, last month we introduced this whole challenge, and we looked at what makes a disciple. And we found that a disciple is one who faithfully follows Jesus and intentionally makes other disciples. So this morning, we begin with this first part of what makes a disciple, the faithfully following part. Faithfully following Jesus begins by embracing the mission of Jesus. What Jesus was all about, why he came, why he was here on earth, what was the driving purpose in all that he did, woven through his life. And this mission of Jesus is probably most clearly seen in something Luke shares in his gospel account. So if you have your Bibles, you can open up to Luke chapter 19 this morning. And set you a little stage here for it. Jesus is on his way from the north area of Galilee, and he's going down towards Jerusalem. And this is the last time he's going to come into Jerusalem, because why he's there this time is when he's going to be arrested and tried and then crucified, all unjustly as an innocent man. But this is the last time he's coming in. So he's coming south towards Jerusalem, and he's coming along the Jordan River. And now he gets even with Jerusalem, and he starts heading west into Jerusalem and passing through some of the towns. And one of the towns he's getting into is the town of Jericho. And before he even gets to Jericho, a buzz starts coming. We heard this Jesus guy is coming. Have you heard everything he did? And all these, and crowds start gathering, lining the streets, wanting to see him. And there's one particular man also in the crowd who wants to see this Jesus who he heard about. And his name is Zacchaeus. And Zacchaeus, he was a tax collector. And tax collectors, they were considered the lowest of the low. We can relate to that, right? They were the worst of sinners. Because tax collectors, they were Jewish people, but they worked hand in hand with the Roman oppressors, collecting taxes for the Roman Empire. And what they would do, they'd also, in collecting the taxes for the Roman Empire, they'd also collect more than what was asked, so that they could pad their own pockets and become rich themselves. So the people didn't like tax collectors so much. And this was Zacchaeus. And in addition to being a tax collector, he was a short guy. So when he gets to the streets and sees them all lined, he can't see anything. So he climbs up in a tree so he can see Jesus walk by. And this is where we pick up in verse 5. It says, and when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and he said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay in your house today. So he hurried and he came down and received Jesus joyfully. And when they saw it, now who's the they? The they here are these religious leaders, particularly the scribes and the Pharisees, these keepers of the law. When they saw it, they all grumbled, saying, he's gone in to be the guest of a man who's a sinner. And Zacchaeus, while he's in the house with Jesus, he stands and he says to the Lord, behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor. And if I've defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. And Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, since he's also a son of Abraham, or he's a Jew. And then Jesus says something really significant. Verse 10, he says, for the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. Did you catch that? The Son of Man, Jesus, came to seek and save the lost. This was Jesus' mission. This is Jesus' mission. It's why he healed the sick. It's why he went to the cross to pay for our sin. It's why, when walking down a street in Jericho in a huge crowd, picks one man out of that crowd to speak to and to call. It was his mission. No matter what he was doing and where he was going, Jesus was continually seeking and saving the lost. And becoming a faithful follower of Jesus, you know where it begins? It begins when what is important to Jesus and what is central to Jesus becomes important and central to us. That's where it all begins in faithfully following Jesus. When we begin becoming his disciple, as our mission becomes seeking and saving the lost. Now you may be sitting here today and saying, well, yeah, I know that. It sounds great. But maybe you're also thinking, well, doing that's another matter entirely. I don't know if I can do that. I don't know how to do it. I don't even know where to begin. And oftentimes, one of the main reasons we never begin that or never take part in that mission is we're not really sure what it really means to seek and save the lost. What does it look like? So this morning, I want to kind of unpack this as we discover what it means to embrace the mission of Jesus. And again, it begins, the first part, to seek those that are lost. But what does that look like? Well, Luke shows us in his gospel account in another place. You go back a few chapters to Luke chapter 15. Luke chapter 15 is a cool chapter of Luke. Because this is another time Jesus, he's with the lost. In fact, it starts out in verse 1, it says, Now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to Jesus. And the Pharisees and the scribes grumbled, saying, This man receives sinners and eats with them. Sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? So in response to that, verse 3, he says, So he told them this parable. Actually, Jesus tells them 3 parables here in Luke 15 that all relate to seeking the lost. And what's a parable? A parable is basically, it's a short story, in an ordinary earthly story, everyday story, that teaches a godly truth. So that's what a parable is. So Jesus says to them this parable. Look at verse 4. Here's what he shares. What man of you, having 100 sheep, if he's lost one of them, does not leave the 99 in the open country and go after the one that's lost until he finds it? So he's describing a shepherd. People he's talking to would get shepherds. And they said, Hey, you got 100 sheep. You lose one of them. Aren't you going to go look for that? I mean, you're going to become obsessed with looking for that one sheep until you find it. Debbie was talking to me about that. She goes, I really saw that in that parable when we lost our dog one time. Because we have a couple of dogs. And one time we lost our dog. And she didn't care about the dog in the house. You know, she says, that dog's fine. I'm going. And she'd go everywhere until she found it. And in describing this parable, and that he leaves all his other sheep to go find the one that's missing, Jesus is saying that in seeking the lost, we're to be intentional. So what does seeking look like? Well, first, it's intentional. We make a conscious effort to value the lost, or to make the lost a priority. You see, it's one thing to know who's lost in our world, or who doesn't have Jesus, is living life without new life in Jesus. It's one thing to know that, and sometimes it's pretty clear that we can pick them out. Maybe it's somebody at your work that, man, they're just cut through. Or maybe it's a friend of yours who's hurting and they just lost hope. Yeah, they're lost. Or maybe it's a family member who just alienates everybody. And everybody says, don't worry about that. They're a black sheep. You know, they're the lost. And while it may be easy sometimes to recognize them, it's another to intentionally go out and seek them or try to connect with them. Make a concerted effort to connect and invest in their lives. To take time away from other things that we could be doing to value them. That's what it means to be intentional. Seeking the lost, it goes beyond just looking. We can sit there and say, oh yeah, there's we do that when we're driving, right? That person, they definitely want Jesus. Driving in the left lane, 40 miles an hour. You know, but we can do that, right? We can judge people. We can say, well, they're lost. But it goes beyond that, right? Because it's about searching. It's about stepping out of our comfort zone often and going. Look at this shepherd. He goes and he leaves the 99 sheep. The 99 sheep that weren't lost. The good ones. The well-behaved ones. You know what this kind of represents for us? Our comfort zone. And it may be just, we have all Christian friends we know. I want to hang out with them. While the person right next door to us is lost. But we're like, well, we want to stay here. And Jesus said, no. You know what seeking the lost is about? You leave them and you go. You desperately and intentionally seek them. Then Jesus tells another parable. Seeking is also like this. Look at verse 8. It says, or what woman, having 10 silver coins, if she loses one coin, does not light a lamp and sweep the house and seek diligently to find it. Man, when I read this, I said, keys. I don't know about your house. Our house has a black hole. Things just get lost. They'll be like right out in the open, and we'll turn our head, and all of a sudden it's gone. Do you ever lose something like that? And you're just like, I gotta find it. We can't do anything until we find this. Tear apart everything, you know? Then you find it right where almost out in the open. You just kept moving it to look for it, I guess. But that's what Jesus is saying with this woman with this coin. She had 10 coins, she lost one. And that's so valuable that she tears apart the house, or she diligently seeks it until she finds it. She's looking everywhere to find it. Seeking those that are lost. In doing that, we're also to be determined. Nothing's going to stop us. Do you ever have that kind of determination? How determined are we in connecting with the lost in our lives? Because sometimes we say, yeah, I want to connect with the lost, and we get with them, and we try to share with them, maybe we try to connect with them, and it's rejected, or they put up a wall or something like that, and we just say, all right, I tried. The rest is God's work, they're just lost. And we don't say, how am I going to invest in them? How am I going to find ways? So you see, seeking the lost means being determined, which means we don't stop until we connect. And we try different ways to connect with those in our lives. Maybe it's at work and you're with somebody, and you start by just praying for them. But then you start sharing yourself with them, opening up to them. Maybe you say, all right, that didn't connect yet. All right, well, let me ask about their life. Take an interest in them. Hey, what'd you do this weekend? Oh, that sounds cool. Maybe it goes to say, hey, why don't you go bowling or something? Go do something. But you're trying every different way that you can connect with someone. That's determination. That's what Jesus is talking about in this parable. You know what seeking the lost is? It's being determined. And then Jesus shares the final story. This is a little longer story, but it's a story probably most of you have heard. It's about a father and a son. And the son's this young kid, and he wants to go out on his own. He says, you know what, I'm all right, I can handle this. So he convinces his dad to give him his inheritance early. And he goes out on his own, and he lives it up. He lives it up so much that he blows through all his money right away. And now he's penniless and desperate without anything. And also embarrassed or ashamed. And one day, he's face down in a pig pen. Literally. And he starts thinking, you know, my life really stinks. Even my dad's servants have it better than I do. Maybe I'll go back to him, to my dad, and I'll just beg, I know I'm not your son anymore, but just make me your servant. Anything. So he starts to go back home again, back to his house, and he finds something amazing. Look at verse 20. It says, and he arose and came to his father, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion and ran and embraced him and kissed him. Did you catch that? His dad came to him. His dad was watching for him. Just picture his dad. His son goes off and, maybe he hears stories about the son or whatever, but every day he's looking out the door or he's looking out the window and saying, is he coming home? Is he coming home? Man, I wish he's coming. And he looks. And then this one day he looks. And over the horizon on the hill he sees a figure. He goes, that could be him. That could be him. And he runs out. And he welcomes his son home. You see, if we're to seek the lost in our life, we're to be persistent. Not just determined, but persistent, long-suffering, patient. You see, this persistence in seeking the lost in our life, it builds compassion in us. Because we start to value. And we start to say, yeah, you're valuable to me because you're valuable to Jesus. And this compassion to welcome the lost home again. And sometimes it's like we talked about last week. We cry out to God, how long? How long? I keep doing the right things. I keep reaching out. I keep seeking. And nothing's happening. Persistence keeps us going. Keeps us seeking to connect with those in our lives so that one day we can help them. We can welcome them home. Bringing them to salvation. You see, that's that second part of Jesus' mission. Not only seek the lost, but to save the lost. And we seek, then we save. Actually, we don't have the power to save. Jesus came to save because he has the power to save. We can't save. So what do? We bring people to Jesus for salvation. In fact, Luke shows us in another account what Jesus is talking about and what bringing those to salvation looks like. In Luke chapter 4, this is early in his ministry. Jesus is in his hometown in Nazareth, and he goes into the synagogue, the local church there, and they would have something where you could go up and you could read scripture in front of people. So he walks to the front and he takes a scroll, and it's scripture from Isaiah, and he unscrolls it, and he starts reading a prophecy by Isaiah that's about him. And here's what he says in Luke chapter 4. He says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovering the sight of the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And in this, Jesus is basically saying this is what it looks like to proclaim salvation to the lost. Now, Jesus did it with his actions. He did it with his words. He did it through his death on the cross, and he showed us. And we can do this by pointing others to Jesus. Actually sharing Jesus. And this passage reveals how we bring it to the lost. We first of all do it. He says, well, by proclaiming good news to the poor. You know what we're doing? We're sharing a message of hope. We want to bring the lost to salvation. We share a message of hope. Because there are those that are lost that are losing hope. Maybe they've surrounded their life and tried to surround it with everything. Maybe I'll have a loved one, and that'll finally fill that hole in my life. Or possessions and all these things. And they realize they could have everything, but not have Jesus, and they realize they have nothing. And we come in and say, you can have Jesus, because if you have Jesus, you have everything. Proclaiming the message of hope. There is hope. You can have that hole filled through Jesus. Jesus alone came to save, and he came for all, and that is good news. So as Jesus said, proclaim good news to the poor. And then he just says, talking about the captives and the oppressed. You know, people that are kind of captive, in bondage. Well, we're to bring these lost to salvation by sharing a message of freedom. Right? Jesus says, proclaim liberty to them. Message of freedom declares that only Jesus can free us from our sin, from our past, from our shame, from what others say about us. Jesus alone can free us from that. Because in him we're fully loved, we're fully forgiven, we're fully accepted, and nobody can take that away from us if we have Jesus. In him, there's freedom. And then he goes on and he says, and also recovering sight to the blind. Those who are blinded by sin, those who are blinded by faulty thinking and darkness, where they just don't get the key to having real life is in Jesus. And we can help recover sight to the blind, or sharing a message of forgiveness. Because this is what our world is lost. When they're blind, they're blinded to what forgiveness is all about. Have you ever talked with people and they talk about, well, I've been good. I've done this, I've done this, I've done this. And we get into blinded, thinking that it's up to us to handle our sin. It's up to us to make ourselves acceptable to God. And Jesus comes along and says, no, we'll never be acceptable to God. You can keep on that hamster wheel all you want, and you're going to get nowhere. You don't see it. Jesus alone. can make us acceptable. He's come to forgive. And we can share this message of forgiveness or recover sight to the blind. And then Jesus closes that out. And Isaiah says about Jesus, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Now the word year is actually not like 365 days. You know what it means? It means the time period of God's favor, which never ends. So he's basically saying, you know what, we go to the lost and we're sharing with them a message of life. Real life. Life begins. Life has value in Jesus. Through him we gain life right here and now because he is with us. We can live free and joyous right here and now, knowing that he's at work in our lives. Free from sin, experiencing the endless love of God. And then it continues beyond this life into eternity. And this life is only found in Jesus. So this is what Jesus is talking about. He says, I've come to seek and save the lost. That's my mission. And this is where it all begins in following Jesus ourselves, by embracing this mission. By saying, if this is Jesus' mission, this is my mission. We actively seek out and bring the lost to salvation. And maybe you're here today and you say, man, that sounds great. I want that. But I can't do that. I don't know anything. I can't talk to people and it doesn't come out right, or I don't have the kind of knowledge and all these things. Guess what? This mission, it's not beyond us. In fact, this morning, I want to do something a little different. I want to invite you to dream with me a little bit. Okay? Think about this. What would happen if each and every one of us took up this mission? Seeking the lost in our lives and bringing them to salvation. So I want you to close your eyes for a minute. Just take a moment with God for a minute. And I want to ask this question to you. Who is a lost one in my life? Who do I know that's lost and I'd love to see found? Did a name or a face come to your mind? Did you just see something? You see, as we ask ourselves that question, God shows us that because we're already thinking of that person. But now to think, I'd love to see this person found. I close my eyes. I see a couple people, but I see one person in particular. Man, I want to see them come to Jesus. Okay, as soon as you get that name or that picture, I want you to do something. You can look this way. And on your note sheet during your working it out, question number 2 says, who is lost in my life? I just want you to write that name down. Maybe it's a group of people. I don't know. Or several people. It could be a family member. It could be somebody at your workplace. It could be a friend at school. Just write that name right there. Okay, as soon as you do that, I want you to do one more thing. Okay, close your eyes again. We're going to get another picture. God's going to send us another picture. Make something clear. The Holy Spirit in our lives. It's going to make something clear to us. And I want you to ask yourself this question. This person that I'd love to see found, what would they look like if Jesus gave them new life? If they've been saved by Jesus, God's brought them salvation, what's different about them? What's changed? That person that's special to you, that comes to mind when you think, I'd love to see them come to Jesus. And then, man, what would happen if they did? Do you see it? Later on today, you can look this way once you see it. Go to your note sheet later on today and it says describe what that looks like. And you can just write that down. But I want you to remember, I want you to write this down because I want you to remember it. Because what God is showing us when we do that, He's showing us what He can do through us. Because He wouldn't give us that picture if He didn't want us to follow it. Do you have that? That's taking on His mission. He desires us to use us right here and now, right where you are. Tell you that I remind us all of this. I remind myself of this. God has us right where we are for a reason. We have the friends we have for a purpose. We're at our work for a reason. We go to the school we go to for a reason. We live in the house of the neighborhood we're in. And there's lost everywhere right before us that God is bringing into our lives. And God's called us to seek and then to bring them to Jesus. And if you're here this morning and you said, man, I have this vision. This is what I want. This is what I want to do with my life. I would love to see this happen. And you're saying, that's me. I want to seek and save the lost. But maybe you're sitting here saying, yeah, but I don't even know where to start. Well, part of our challenge this year in becoming is we're not on this journey alone. When Jesus called his disciples, he didn't just call one. He had a group. He said, we're going to travel this road together in becoming a disciple. And I want to stand with you. I want to walk with you in this year as I walk with it and meet and talk about how we can do this, what it looks like. So I want you to do something this morning. After the service, I'm not going to be at the back door. I'm going to be right up here after the service. And if you're sitting there and saying, this is what I want, I want you just to come up here and we can sit in these first few rows. I want to tell you a little bit about what it can look like as we get started with it, the next step in this journey of seeking the lost. But again, the mission of Jesus is to seek and save those who are lost. And we begin following him as that becomes our mission. Let's pray.